Now, we know they, look, I did a video yesterday, Natasha Cloud going off on one of the most insane rants you've ever heard in your life, just comes out and admits, well, you can just write this off and you can just write this off as an owner, so we don't care if you lose money. And it's like, okay, but you got to remember that's coming from somebody that their ideology, their personal political ideology.
Taken together, these developments paint a picture of negotiations defined by complexity, tension, and high stakes. Each statement, proposal, and counterproposal adds another layer to a situation already dense with competing priorities. The league emphasizes fiscal responsibility and long-term sustainability. The players emphasize growth, recognition, and a share of rising visibility. Neither objective is inherently incompatible with the other, yet aligning them requires careful calibration. That process is proving far more difficult than either side may have anticipated when talks first began. One reason the conflict feels so intense is that timing amplifies every disagreement. Deadlines create pressure, and pressure magnifies differences. As the scheduled start of the season approaches, logistical realities, training camps, travel arrangements, broadcast schedules, sponsorship commitments begin to loom larger. Each passing week without a deal increases uncertainty not only for executives and athletes but also for fans, partners, and broadcasters whose plans depend on a functioning calendar. The closer those deadlines get, the more urgent the need for resolution becomes. Another factor is perception. Negotiations are not conducted solely in private conference rooms. They unfold in public view, where statements are analyzed, numbers are debated, and narratives take shape. Public perception can influence leverage. If fans believe one side is being unreasonable, pressure may mount on that side to compromise. Consequently, both camps craft their messaging carefully, framing their positions in ways designed to resonate with observers. Despite the friction, history suggests that prolonged negotiations do not always end in failure. Many major sports agreements have been reached only after months of stalemate and sharp rhetoric. The path to compromise is rarely smooth. It often involves moments when agreement seems impossible right up until it suddenly becomes inevitable. Whether this situation will follow that pattern remains uncertain, but the possibility exists. What is clear is that the outcome will have lasting consequences. The eventual agreement will shape salary structures, benefits, revenue distribution, and labor relations for years to come. It will influence how future negotiations are approached and what expectations both sides carry into them. In that sense, the current dispute is not merely about the next contract. It is about establishing the blueprint for how the league and its players coexist moving forward. However the standoff resolves, its effects will extend far beyond this season, defining the balance of power, trust, and cooperation that determines the sport's trajectory in the years ahead.
I'm getting some new widgets. All right. God, here we go. WNBA National Basketball Players Association submitted a counterproposal to the WNBA on Tuesday that included some concessions. I don't understand why all of this comes out late at night. They try to put this stuff out at night because they're trying to tamper down the blowback, and I'm not kidding you. All the news cycles are over with for the day, yada, yada, yada.
That reaction alone reveals more about the state of negotiations than any official press release ever could. The WNBA didn't merely decline the latest counterproposal from the WNBPA, it rejected it with such force and finality that the response felt symbolic, almost theatrical, like a defensive swat from Dikembe Mutombo sending a shot flying into the stands. The wording of the league's statement was strikingly blunt, stripped of diplomatic cushioning, and so direct that it might as well have been typed in capital letters for emphasis. With roughly 80 days remaining before the scheduled season opener and still no agreement finalized, the tension surrounding these talks has shifted from cautious concern to open alarm. What unfolded that Tuesday afternoon illustrates exactly why. The Players Association submitted what it described as a revised offer containing meaningful concessions. Central among them was a reduction in their revenue-sharing demand, lowered from 31% of gross revenue to 27.5%. From the union's perspective, that adjustment represented progress, a tangible sign they were willing to move closer to middle ground. But the league's reaction came almost instantly, and it was not encouraging. Rather than acknowledging the shift as a step forward, officials dismissed the proposal outright, labeling it unrealistic. That single word carried enormous weight. In negotiation language, calling an offer unrealistic is not the same as saying it needs modification or further discussion. It signals that the proposal is viewed as fundamentally detached from practical possibility. The speed of the rejection amplified its impact. Observers expected at least a brief review period, perhaps a day or two of analysis before any official response. Instead, the answer arrived so quickly that it suggested decision-makers did not see the need for prolonged evaluation. To them, the flaws were obvious at first glance. That perception alone deepens the divide, because while one side believes it has made a reasonable compromise, the other sees the same document as proof that their counterparts still misunderstand the league's financial reality. This moment matters not only because of what was said, but because of what it implies about the road ahead. Negotiations usually progress through incremental adjustments, with each revision bringing positions closer together. Here, the latest revision appears to have confirmed how far apart the two sides remain. With the calendar steadily advancing and logistical deadlines approaching, every rejected proposal increases pressure on both camps. If neither side changes course, the question may soon shift from whether a deal will be reached smoothly to whether it will be reached in time at all. And that looming uncertainty is what makes this reaction so revealing. It shows that beneath the formal statements and calculated language, the gap separating these negotiators is still vast.
We're not going through that. So, the WNBA promptly said H to the N. Hell to the no. Hell to the no, to the no. Anybody remember that dude? Yeah. Anyway, wow. WNBA fires back at Players Union over unrealistic counter proposal. I mean, if there had been ink involved in that statement, it wouldn't have been dry. And the WNBA swatted this joker down. Adam Silver said, nah, get out. Nah.
Amid the heated debate over revenue percentages, one area of the proposal actually demonstrates a measure of compromise from the players' side: housing provisions. At present, teams are generally required to provide housing accommodations for athletes, a benefit designed to ease relocation challenges and ensure stable living arrangements during the season. In their latest offer, the players suggested that in later years of the agreement, franchises would no longer need to supply housing for maximum salary players who hold multi-year contracts with full salary guarantees. On its face, that adjustment appears practical. High-earning veterans with secure contracts typically possess the financial resources to arrange their own accommodations. Allowing teams to phase out housing support for that group could reduce expenses while preserving assistance for younger or lower-paid players who might need it more. Observers across the sports business world noted that this element of the proposal sounded like a genuine attempt to meet ownership halfway. Yet even this constructive step has struggled to gain traction, largely because it is overshadowed by the broader financial demands that remain unresolved. From the league's perspective, concessions on secondary benefits do little to offset concerns about the primary revenue-sharing structure. They argue that adjusting housing rules is helpful but insufficient if the core economic framework still threatens long-term stability. In other words, solving a smaller cost issue does not address what they see as a much larger one. Players counter that incremental compromises should matter. Negotiations rarely produce sweeping agreement all at once, they advance through a series of smaller steps. Demonstrating flexibility on benefits like housing, they say, shows willingness to collaborate. If those gestures are dismissed, it risks discouraging further concessions. This dynamic highlights a common challenge in labor talks: each side tends to evaluate compromises differently. What one party considers meaningful progress, the other may view as peripheral. The housing debate therefore illustrates both the potential and the limitation of partial agreement. It proves that the sides are capable of finding common ground on certain issues. At the same time, it underscores how unresolved core disagreements can overshadow those successes. Even well-received ideas struggle to move negotiations forward if they do not address the central conflict. Until the larger financial questions are settled, smaller compromises, no matter how reasonable, may continue to feel like footnotes rather than breakthroughs.
Collective bargaining agreement proposal, quote, unrealistic, as the two sides remain at odds with the 2026 season scheduled to start in 80 days. Oh, that's not good. The Women's National Basketball Players Association submitted a revised proposal hours earlier. Prior to that, included some concessions on several hot-button topics. You can't call that revenue sharing. I mean, come on. They dropped it 2.5%. The league wants them to drop the gross part altogether because it's gross. But the WNBA said its modifications were not enough
to fully grasp the ideological tension shaping these negotiations. Attention inevitably turns to comments made by Natasha Cloud several weeks ago, remarks that suddenly seem far more significant in light of current events. In a candid public statement, she argued that team owners could absorb financial losses through mechanisms such as tax write-offs, real estate offsets, or other business deductions. Her point, as she framed it, was that ownership groups often possess diversified portfolios and multiple revenue streams, meaning a deficit in one area does not necessarily translate into overall financial hardship. For some listeners, that argument sounded like a straightforward observation about how large-scale investors operate. For others, particularly those focused on league sustainability, it sounded like a declaration that profitability itself should not be the primary concern. That distinction is crucial. Negotiations depend on shared assumptions about goals. If both sides agree that the objective is a profitable, stable league, they can debate how to divide revenue within that framework. But if one side treats profitability as optional while the other treats it as essential, the conversation shifts from bargaining to philosophical dispute. League officials emphasize this tension in their response, stressing the need for long-term business health and financial sustainability. They framed those priorities not as corporate jargon but as practical necessities. Operating a professional sports league involves significant expenses: player salaries, travel logistics, arena operations, marketing campaigns, administrative staff, and more. If total costs consistently exceed total revenue, the model becomes difficult to maintain. From that perspective, insisting on financial viability is not a negotiating tactic, it is a structural requirement. The challenge arises because the player's viewpoint is shaped by a different set of experiences. Athletes see rising attendance, increased media attention, and expanding cultural influence. They interpret those signs as evidence that the sport's value is growing rapidly. When they hear claims that higher compensation would be unsustainable, they question whether those claims fully account for the league's upward momentum. In their eyes, the future looks bright enough to justify ambitious demands. This contrast in outlook explains why the talks sometimes feel like conversations conducted in parallel rather than together. One side speaks the language of balance sheets and risk management. The other speaks the language of growth and opportunity. Both perspectives contain logic, yet they lead to different conclusions. Until negotiators find a way to reconcile those underlying assumptions, every proposal will be filtered through incompatible lenses, making agreement elusive. What Cloud's remarks highlighted, intentionally or not, is that the debate is not solely about numbers. It is about how each side defines the purpose and priorities of the league itself.
Right here. Amid the now 16-month negotiation, the league has continuously emphasized the importance of business health and sustainability. A source familiar with the situation told ESPN the league projects the new plan, the one they just handed in last night, would still result in $460 million in losses. $460 million in losses. But the player's good with that. Oh, because we think they're cooking the books. I mean, you can say you think the owners are lying all you want. I mean, you can say that, but it doesn't make it so. That doesn't make it true. I don't know what to
What makes the situation even more complicated is the sheer length of time these discussions have already consumed. The Players Association and league representatives have been engaged in negotiations for 16 months. 16 months is not a brief round of bargaining or a routine contractual refresh. It is an extended period long enough to test patience, reshape expectations, and expose deep philosophical divides. When talks stretch across more than a year without resolution, it usually indicates that the disagreement is not about a minor clause or a single disputed figure. It suggests the two sides fundamentally see the landscape differently. During that time, countless meetings, financial reviews, and strategic consultations have taken place behind closed doors. Analysts, lawyers, economists, and advisors have examined spreadsheets, projected revenues, and debated cost structures. Each side has had ample opportunity to refine its arguments and stress test its assumptions. That is why the league's response to the latest proposal carried such weight. Officials didn't just say they disagreed. They attached a specific number to their objection, stating that under the terms presented, the proposal would generate approximately $460 million in losses. Numbers of that magnitude are impossible to ignore. $460 million is not a marginal deficit or a temporary dip. It is the kind of projected loss that forces business leaders to reconsider strategy, investment, and long-term commitment. From ownership's standpoint, accepting a deal that produces a deficit of that scale would be financially irresponsible. They argue that no sustainable enterprise can knowingly sign on to an agreement that guarantees such a substantial negative outcome. Yet the presence of that number does not automatically settle the debate. Financial projections depend on assumptions about growth rates, sponsorship trends, media rights, attendance, and expansion. Change those assumptions and the projected result can shift dramatically. The players' side questions whether the league's calculations accurately reflect the sport's upward trajectory. They suspect the projections may be overly conservative, emphasizing risk rather than potential. This disagreement over forecasts illustrates why the talks have lasted so long. Negotiators are not simply arguing about percentages. They are arguing about which version of the future is most realistic. One side believes caution is necessary to ensure survival. The other believes optimism is justified by momentum. When two parties base their positions on different visions of what lies ahead, compromise becomes extraordinarily difficult. And that is why 16 months of dialogue have not yet produced consensus. The issue is not silence or lack of effort. It is that each new exchange reveals just how differently the two sides interpret the same economic landscape.